Okay, there we go. Well, this is Thursday, March 11th, and Jenny and I are here to help anyone who would like to get a little bit more information about the Esri ArcGIS online map competition for middle school and high school. Last time we talked a little bit about getting into your story and geo inquiries and different types of stories to tell. So I'm just going to go back and kind of refresh your memory that like a geo, one of the things that you ought to think about when you're having students do a project for the competition is to make sure they have a plan and a process in place. And the process in geography and for GIS is this inquiry process where you have some type of a question, you're getting your information, you explore or analyze your maps, and then you kind of evaluate, draw conclusions. There might be some action that you take. So, and then we talked a little, just briefly mentioned that there's all kinds of stories that can be told. So maybe, especially if you're new to ArcGIS online and to story maps, maybe you want students to do an awareness project. And in the end, they might draw some conclusions about patterns and relationships that they see. Maybe there's a problem in your community or town that you would like to deal with. And we're going to go into some of these in a little bit more detail in a minute. Maybe there's an issue. So a problem is something that you look to solve so the problem doesn't exist anymore, like traffic congestion or some type of pollution. And so it's a problem and you can find some solutions to work with it. An issue really deals with points of view. And so maybe some people feel that there ought to be a new school built and other people don't. And so it's not really a problem, but it's an issue that you have different points of view on that people can discuss. You might want to do something that has historical significance to your community and then kind of bring it into, what's relevant about the community today. And maybe there's a transformation that took place that you want to talk about. You might want to compare two places or two situations. And maybe students just want to, have an evaluation like, is this really, like maybe there's a park in your community and, is it really a good park? And so you develop some criteria and do an evaluation or assessment about something. So there's a lot of different kinds of geographic stories that you can tell. So our contest in Illinois is hometown Illinois. So we ask that you kind of focus on your local area. And that's going to vary by where you are in the state. If you lived in the city of Chicago, you have the whole city of Chicago and the metropolitan area, but you probably want to maybe focus more on your neighborhood perhaps bring it down to, something that might be more manageable, but you can do the city if you like. If you live and some of the other places around the state, maybe as I do and Jenny does, she lives in Springfield, so she lives in a larger area and a community has, a very specialized clientele that are there all the time. I live in a small community, Grays Lake, Illinois, that at one time was a rural community and now is just sort of an extension of the suburbs to some extent, but it still has a lot of the rural atmosphere around it. The thing that's gone are we don't have all the as many farm fields around anymore. So, so depending on where you live, you might need to scale back so that you don't have such a large area to look at. And so looking at a community or a neighborhood, is fine. If you want to look at a larger city or you want to look at your county, you certainly can do things like that. One of the things, the reason I bring this up is one of the main ideas in geography is scaling, what you're looking at. So, we have international and global scales, and we have the scale of our continent, of our country, our state, down into looking at our counties and maybe even to our communities. So if you are, one of the questions it seemed that we were getting was, how do I tie this to my curriculum? And so again, what you want to think about is, what is your curriculum? And then how can you scale that down, those same concepts, that same terminology, how can you scale it down to your local region? And that's something, we're willing to help you with individually. It's hard to, I can give you a broad thing, but I don't know if anyone's studying like migration at this particular time, like in US history, maybe looking at migration patterns as people were coming to the United States, or the westward migration in early American history. Or it might be a migration of the Native American population, a forced migration into the Indian reservations, or migration of the African American community after the Civil War, in particular, coming more to the north. So you can look at it at a broader scale, but then start looking at, and that's what you might do in your class, and that's part of your curriculum. But then you can say, okay, well, what's the migration? What happened in my own community? Where did the people come from? Were they coming, were they a specific ethnic group or racial group? Were they coming as families? Were there a lot of individuals that were just moving here? When did they come? Was this a part of the, a major migration pattern coming from Europe or Asia, or, another particular area, Central America? Or was it something that it was just like in the case of Gray's Lake, where after the community was here for over 100 years, all of a sudden the population just started to grow because people were leaving the city of Chicago and looking for new property, and this was an area for development. So that's a different kind of migration, but you still use the same terminology. You're still looking at the concept of people moving and why they move, what pulls them to a certain area, what pushes them out of another area. So again, you're looking at scale that, you may be looking at more of a national or international scale in your studies, but then for the contest, you can bring it down and look at the local scale. And kids also get a little bit better idea of the terminology and the concepts behind that. So I did, one of the things is to brainstorm, do you have issues or problems, or, do you want the project? I know when I've worked with students in my middle school classes, I'd give them this list and I'd say, you tell me what you're doing. Are you doing an awareness project? Are you going to look at a problem and try to find the solution? But you, in your classroom, maybe you want all the students looking at a particular problem and looking at solutions. So, you can kind of play with that, which is what's best for you as an instructor, and what you want to accomplish with your students. Migration was one that we just talked about as an example of something that's in textbooks. It might be part of your curriculum, but then looking just into your own region or your town, again, you might want to use your county again as part of that, or just your neighborhood if you live in a very large town. And again, I tend to, because it's an inquiry process, I like to work with questions. Rather than just saying, well, we're going to tell where people came from. That's more of a statement, well, where did the people come from? And why did they come from those areas? And what pulled them to this particular area? Another thing that you might look at is maybe there's a need for something in your community. Maybe you have an older community and a building is going to be torn down for whatever, it just may be in disrepair. So maybe what should go in that spot when they tear it down? I mean, obviously sometimes there's ownership involved in it, but maybe as a community, like in Gray's Lake, we had to face the situation of growing population, new schools had to be built. And so where is that school going to go? Or maybe it's a business relocating, or maybe it's just that the community is saying, you know what, we need some recreation areas. And I remember my middle school students always saying, you know what, there's no movie theaters near us. We have to go, quite a ways. Our parents have to drive us. And so they used to bring up things that they would like to have in their community as well. So for that, you're going to do a little bit of an analysis of what's there and what's not there. You might use some demographic information, like how old are the people, their income, the population, the density. And so, look at the demographics of your particular area, and there's census data out there that you can use. And then what is it that needs to be added? And I also put deleted, because we also get to that situation, and this also happened in Gray's Lake. We had this huge population. We had to build new schools, and now the amount of student people that are in the student age, the elementary school age, is so much less. The population is not growing. And so now, they had to close a school. So the question is, which school do you close and why? So again, you're looking at the bigger picture to figure out what's going to be best for the community. Um, and then especially if something's new going to be added, um, maybe, it's okay, where is it going to be added? Where are you going to put it? And why would you put it there? And I think part of it also is looking at the impacts of it. And so there might be financial impacts of, especially if you're building a new business and a new business is going to be built in town. Um, there may be impact, for more jobs, but maybe another impact might be that the traffic becomes worse. And so I keep using Gray's Lake because obviously I'm more familiar with that, but they've recently added an intermodal system for trucking in particular. And one of my fears when I heard that that was going to happen was that we'd have these semi trucks driving on, on the streets, even though they were state routes, that a lot of them were still 2 lane up in this area, and was that going to really cause more congestion? In the end, it has not. In fact, I see very few of these semi trucks, so I'm not quite, I guess somehow that's all worked out. But so again, you look at the impacts, and that's positive and negative impacts. Well, some of you might say, well, I teach science or environmental studies. I'm not a social science teacher. And so again, you have to think about where you are in your curriculum, but some things you might do with environmental studies is you might look at the quality of the water, the air, the soil around you and get samples. And many of you have the testing kits. If you're a science teacher, you would have the testing kits to test the samples. And maybe like in the agricultural areas in Illinois, you could do soil and see, you could test it for different minerals and things that are in it. All of that stuff then is mappable, okay? Because you've taken it from a location and you've gotten some statistical information about it. And so you can start plotting out, even in agricultural fields, differences maybe in water, or it might have something, again, to do with minerals that are in the soil. Anyone can do air quality and even day-to-day fluctuations of air quality. And so again, you can, be looking at that thing and thinking about pollution, and then is there a way, where is the pollution coming from? Look at point and non-point sources, and is there a way of mitigating that? How do we, try to have less pollution? A lot of kids are interested in weather patterns, so you might be teaching the weather instruments and looking at the patterns. So in Illinois, we certainly, not only between snow and rain, so different types of precipitation and changes. I mean, it's the variance from year to year, and that creates the, what becomes that we look at, like the climate of Illinois, and changes between the northern and southern parts of the state in terms of climate. But we also have, they can track weather patterns. They can build a rain gauge and have it out there and be collecting samples. And if you have several students doing it in different locations, start looking at how much, rain falls in different places. And again, even testing the quality, the acidity of the rainwater is something else that you can be done and use, and you can use those statistics in part of your analysis. We also have tornado patterns in Illinois, and so they could go back and look. This stuff is available very readily to map. They could pull out the old tornado data, and they can also then start looking, maybe making some predictions about what might be happening this season. Maybe you're in an area that natural disasters happen. So in Illinois, that might be, we even have earthquakes in Illinois, not a lot, but we certainly have soil erosion. I'm sorry, that's not really a natural disaster, but that would be another thing to look at with soil. Flooding. as a natural disaster that we have in Illinois. And again, looking at, what are the flood patterns? And again, these are things that can not only can be mapped, but have been mapped. So there's past data to help that students can look at, and then look at what's happening now in terms of that. Tornadoes certainly cause is a natural disaster as well. Maybe you're studying about plant or animal species. And again, often you're going to do it in a more global aspect, but what about looking at a forest preserve and going out and doing a count of specific species of plants or animals? Or maybe it's identification. Maybe your area has an endangered plant. And so again, you're going to not only have these things mapped, but then be thinking about, do we need to help protect this in some way, and how would we go about doing that? Brownfields are areas of that there might have been oil spills or some type of dumping, and then they build over them. So perhaps you live near a brownfield, and so you can be thinking about, I know in Waukegan, which is near where I live, they were a super fun site to pull all the heavy metals out of their harbor. So, thinking about how this is hazardous, and again, all of this can be put on the map in terms of plotting it. Now, excuse me, in Waukegan, one thing they wanted to do is to revitalize their lakefront. So not only did they have the heavy metals pulled out, but now they want to build condos and some upscale housing along the shoreline. So is that a good idea or not, based on the ground contamination that was there? So those are some ideas I had for environmental studies, and I think I'm going to stop at this point because I've gone through several different things now. Jenny, do you have anything that you might add to any of those three?
Well, I think you covered it really well. I can think of projects that we could do in Springfield that would fit under those three categories. There's a lot of history in Springfield, as there is in any community, but there are the Lincoln sites and the historical landmarks, and just a whole wealth of information, and lots of sources too to get more information. We have this Abraham Lincoln Library. We have the African American History Museum for Central Illinois here in Springfield. So there's just lots of ways to get more information that would fit into one of these categories and make an awesome map.
Yeah, great. I know I was thinking when you started talking about the Lincoln, like there's the Lincoln Highway and the National Highway that terminated in Illinois at Vandalia. Well, I think it did go on to St. Louis, but I think for a while it was the terminus. And so there's a lot of things like the Lincoln Highway. They have signposts along, the roads, and so there may be something like that in your community that that's a trail of some sort that could be, mapped and and showing where certain information is. Okay, well, here were a couple other ideas. Like maybe, and this might not be related to a curriculum idea per se, but transportation needs or traffic patterns and issues. So do you live in an area that there's a lot of congestion? And, again, it's always like, what are the impacts of all that congestion? And it might be anything from, air pollution and more accidents happening. And, is there a way of solving that problem and looking at it in different ways? Maybe there's a need for public transportation. Again, the little community that I live in originally had no public transportation at all. We do have commuter trains into Chicago, so I guess that is, public transportation. They have added PACE buses for people to get around the town a little bit and can go to some of the shopping malls that are not too far away. And there's been huge issues about whether to not only widen expressways and tollways up in the Chicago metropolitan area because of the congestion, or to extend them further out. And I know the Economic Commission who was studying this, they really were trying to look for different ways rather than widening any of the expressways or tollways. Is there a way that we could include public transportation in them? So in the Chicago area, they have the subway, and kind of runs along the Edens and Kennedy, or I'm sorry, the Kennedy anyway, and the Dan Ryan. So are there other ways to get public transportation, and how do you get people there? So a community like Rays Lake, the tollway is 10 miles away. Is there something we can do rather than trying to just make the tollway bigger and longer and draw more people out, into the area? You can think about the economic and transportation networks. And again, if you're teaching in high school, and if you're teaching geography, one of the things is looking at economics, the economic geography. And so looking at industry, looking at agricultural areas, and thinking about the transportation networks in terms of bulk gaining and bulk reducing areas. When I think about some areas around Joliet with the canal system there, and we have so many boats coming, across, or ships, I should say, from, Lake Michigan, and industry in that area. So you have bulk gaining and bulk reducing areas there. The intermodal stations that are developing, the huge warehouses for distribution, like Amazon, just building, just huge warehouses. And so now you have, greater truck traffic and things like that. So in geography, in high school, if you're teaching, or if you are teaching that in middle school as well, this certainly, transportation certainly ties in, especially with economic factors. And then Jenny mentioned this about like history. Before I go on, do you have anything to add to that, Jenny? I should have stopped after each one.
No, I think that takes care of it. We don't have quite the same issues with congestion where we are, but part of this project is learning about other people's communities. So it's really interesting what it would be like to have an Amazon warehouse. I do not know, but it would be amazing.
And actually, communities outside of Chicago, it's more relevant actually to have them there because the land is cheaper and they're expansive. They're huge, and they take up a lot of space. And so sometimes they are looking for property that might be less expensive to purchase. Now, again, Central Illinois land is not cheaper because it's agricultural value, but so again, it's really looking at all of those different things. So, and Jenny did mention, like history. So again, if you're teaching history, you can then take some of those concepts that are done on a global scale or on a national scale and look at your local area. How, what has been the impact of history? I might kind of throw architecture in this as well, because a lot of times architecture kind of displays changes over time, especially if you have a central business district and then and the community keeps growing and the architecture of the homes even changes. So homes that were closer in, I'll use Grace Lake again as an example. Some of the older homes that were built in the early 1900s, they didn't have garages, they had stables. And so those stables actually were converted into garages and they're separate from the homes. And that was a trend for a long time, that even when garages were built, they were not attached. As we became a more mobile society, you had the attachment of garages to the homes. And now a lot of the newer homes, the garages actually extend in front of the house because it's become, it's the shorter driveway, not as much concrete, it gives your backyard a little bit more space or whatever, but it becomes even more prominent than your front door in many cases. So there's just, the whole trend of architecture and architectural styles. And again, what does that tell you about the growth of your community, or maybe just past and current uses of places? What about sequent occupation of an area? So maybe you live in an area that had a lot of Native American population, and eventually the European population has moved in. And maybe again, in larger cities, you might have the transitioning neighborhoods where it used to have a specific ethnic group that was, or even religious group that was living in a particular neighborhood. And as they moved out, who moved in? And again, it gets back into why did that happen? Why did people move out? And what caused the people who moved in, to pull them to that particular area? The last question I threw in there again, because of just where I live, the urban to rural to urban changes, and definitely happened in the community that I live in now, and what caused this change. And again, that goes back into it might fit a little bit more in with some geography um, as you study urban geography. I know Jenny's worked on this one, thinking about
Mhm.
voting trends.
Mhm.
And so again, if you're teaching US history or the Constitution, bring it back down to a local scale, and you can look at the different voting districts. You can get that kind of data and compare what's going on in different voting districts in terms of how people, what party people are seem to be aligned with, and has there been a change over time with that? And Jenny, I'm going to let you
Mhm.
talk more about that because you actually worked on that.
Well, one thing that I did was, I you can map the voter density in different precincts. You can get census data down to actually groups. That's the smallest. That would be just a neighborhood, but so you can get really detailed information about voter density to see what percentage of voters are actually voting in any of these precincts, and maybe identify a problem, or if you want to work for a campaign, you could see where you should try to get people maybe thinking about voting. um, so it can be really interesting, and I know candidates use this mapping um, to for their own campaigns. So
Mhm.
it's a way that you can make a difference.
Yeah, is thinking about that as you were talking. That again, anyone who's running for office, how do they know where to go to have those talks and to give their speeches?
Mhm.
It's not random. It's something that's been
No.
passed out based on the data that they have.
Well, when I was working at Springfield High School, and our GIS class got very interested in mapping that, and we invited the mayor of our town to come, and he got really excited about the possibilities for him as a candidate, knowing, where how people are voting, what party they're voting for, and if there's areas of town that where people just don't go out to vote, that's it can be pretty dramatic, the differences.
Yeah. So again, I'm hoping this gives you some ideas of connecting to your curriculum, first of all, because that was a question that came up a lot about how do we tie it into our curriculum. And then also not only tying it into your curriculum, but how you bring it to the local level. So that you're gathering your own information. And again, I almost want to say that that's key. It's not that you can't get some information off the internet for things, but you're going to find the information is more valuable if it's about your local area and you've gathered it yourself, taking your own pictures. You're there in the community and you can take your own pictures. You don't have to rely on what you find on the internet. Now, you've heard Jenny and I both mention that, oh, you can get that map or that information. Those are map layers when we're talking about like census data or tornado data, population data. And so that's something that's out there. The government puts it out, and that's something even in the ArcGIS Online, in their Living Atlas, you can find layers of information um, that show national coverage of certain things. And so certainly you might want to include that. But then when you want to do a local study that layers on top of that and provides more information about your specific area. So again, just it's without knowing everyone's specific curriculum at this particular time of the year, and different grade levels involved. I know this is kind of a broad brush stroke of how you might be able to scale it down into your local community and to think about different things that students might do. Something else that I just, and this is some upcoming topics that we definitely will spend more time on. But for example, maybe you're thinking, well, how am I going to include maps in this? So again, if you get some information about anything, now this is not a big, huge information thing. I'm going to go back to ArcGIS Online in a minute, but this is a swipe map about coffee shops. So the dots that you see, this is interactive. This was a GIS map that I, first of all, collected data using a survey 123. And I'll show you the ArcGIS map in a moment that this came from. So these were survey points with different questions that I asked and the responses that were asked. And then the data that is mapped on the left side, so it's a swipe map. So here's Grays Lake. These are coffee shops or places that serve coffee, not always a coffee shop, in Grays Lake. And the question that was asked is, do they have internet available to you? Yes, no, or you're unsure. And so again, when you click on the pop-up, you get all of the different questions that were specifically asked. But this particular map was filtered just for, do they have internet? And that's of interest to some people who like to go to a coffee shop, sit down, do a little work while they're drinking things, drinking their coffee and maybe exchange ideas with friends. The blue have internet, the red ones do not. And again, I can, zoom in a little bit more. Notice that both sides of the map zoom in more, so these dots kind of become scattered out. Most of these are fast food places, so they serve coffee and people go to them. A lot of people love McDonald's coffee, but they don't, it's not necessarily a place you might go in and sit and do some internet. The blue ones tend to be actual coffee shops. And so they're appealing to that clientele. They want people to come there and sit and to bring their information. The swipe map on the other side is the same information. Notice the dots are there. Okay, but they're different, colored differently. And in this particular map, I think the color was, they were individual colors to show the individual coffee shops. So some of the colors, I'm trying to think, some of these look a little bit the same. I think that was the information that I had on this particular map, but it's also overlaying a map of population. So I pulled in some census data, and one thing I was looking for, and I'm actually going to zoom out a little bit more, was looking for whether the coffee shops, were there more coffee shops, located in more densely populated areas. Well, this is Grays Lake. I should have probably had have a layer in here that just shows Grays Lake, because these are only coffee shops in Grays Lake. So there are some denser populations in surrounding communities, but I wasn't doing their coffee shops. But it'd be interesting to go in and see, are there more coffee shops in this particular, in these areas that are more densely populated or not? So like I said, this isn't any huge outstanding study. It was just I was doing some work with collecting data about coffee shops and created a little swipe map. And I thought, well, I can pop that in there pretty easily. Another kind of thing that you might do is what's called a map tour. And so again, this is where it's nice if you can go out and get your own images of something. And then it's, you can change your mapping background. And this is done right in the story maps. So I was just thinking about agriculture, and that in spring you have the fertilizing. And so you can, the picture is numbered number 1 and just showing, okay, this is an area, where they were doing some spring fertilizing. They do in July, there's usually a tassel count done for the cornfields, and also kind of monitoring the condition of the corn at that particular time, so they can get an idea of how much it's all going to produce. And so I took and just zoomed in on a map that had rows of cornfields in it. And then I just did a little 3-part thing here, and then fall harvest. So you can see that you have a picture, you have some information, and you have a location on the map. And you can zoom in and out of this map, especially as you set it up. So I kind of wanted to share that. And I did want to share a little bit about, let me just see if this is, oops. Oh, that's not where I wanted to go. My map has gotten hidden. Just a second. I thought I had left it up here for us to go to, but I might have to drill in a little bit. So some of you may recognize this when you go into ArcGIS Online. Here's my name, I'm logged in. These 9 dots, you can see that you have apps. So there's a lot of different parts to ArcGIS now. And if you've been working for a while, we had the map, the online mapping, but we also have a lot of apps that use the online mapping or can contribute to the online mapping. So story maps, which is just what I was in, to, showing you some information. Here's ArcGIS Online. Survey 123 should be here. Oh, there it is. So I can go in there and build a survey, which I did for coffee shops to collect my data. But what I wanted to show you was, and now because it's not open anymore, this might be a little bit, I'm hoping it won't be difficult to find. You can see we have all these different things, and I have a lot of coffee shop things here. And I found the one I wanted. Oops, let's see if this is the one that opens. I'm gonna open it in the map viewer. Ah, yes, it is the one that I want. So again, you have, I'll grab this without changing things. I had a coffee survey, turn that off, these things. I was playing around with a couple other things in here, but I took a coffee survey and using survey 123. And so as I was there, it would automatically register the location information and plot it automatically online. And if I click on the data table down below, you can see all the questions that I asked. So my screen is huge here. I'm sorry. Let me see if I can downsize this a little bit. There we go. So my questions were, you can see them in a data table for every place that's located on the map and the responses. And that correlates then with the point, and the same questions are in the data here. And you saw those questions also in the other map I just showed you in the story map. So, and it looked a little bit different than this. So I can go in and filter information by looking for, maybe I want to have, does it serve other items? And it says yes. So if I apply that filter, oops, I had some other students have been adding to this map from other locations. So let's go back to our Chicago area here and go back to the Grays Lake area. And so this is just a simple yes, no, that they serve other things or they don't. They really are just a coffee shop in doing it. I can also work with my symbols. And it says choose an attribute to show. So those same questions that show in my survey, I can ask to show them. Okay, so maybe let's, do they have, is there seating? Again, that's just going to be a yes, no answer. But it might be indoors, it might be outdoors. And so you can see some of these have seating indoors and some just say other. So you'd have to, again, go in and look at the seating and what the particular, this is part of a Shell gas station. So there may be a little bit of seating in there, but not always. So when you get your data and it is plotted on the map, part of it is that you can go in and then use the symbology and the filtering to help show different data. And again, this, at one point I had added the census data and I'd saved that as a layer so that I could use it again. Those are things that we'll talk about. So more stuff coming up, but we really wanted to share with you, the idea of what you can do locally. So Jenny, anything else that,
Judy, did you say that you worked with students on the coffee shop project?
yes,
So-
in my classes, it's it's kind of a standing assignment for one of our activities. So they learn how to do that. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I had students, this is college level, and some students in Seattle and some around different parts of the state of Illinois. And there was another one in there. Yeah. So we're getting data from it, and it all plots onto the same map in this case.
How long have you been working on that project?
About 3 years.
So that's an example of how a project can build too.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Yeah. So you can, gather information about a lot of different kinds of things around your town. I've done some of the historical features in Grays Lake. It was their 125th celebration last year of becoming a village. And so there's a lot of historic things here as well to build on, as well as the whole agricultural community and how that's changed and stuff like that. So Jenny, anything else to add about types of stories? And
I think this gives a lot of good examples.
and I just want to give you a taste of what's coming with the other maps that we'll talk about in ArcGIS Online. So, okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Jenny, it's just you and me again.
Okay.
And I'll stop the recording at this point.